What if I told you that you are fundamentally a verb masquerading as a noun?
That is, well, it's quite the hook to start with.
Right. I mean, think about it. That the heavy, static, permanent thing that you call I doesn't actually exist. That you are, in reality, just a temporary collision of events.
It is deeply disorienting, yeah.
Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. We have spent, well, a lot of time recently navigating the incredibly dense micro-deconstructions in Nāgārjuna's Mūlamadhyamakakārikā.
The MMK, right.
Exactly. And since you've been following along, you already know the intricate arguments regarding causality, motion, perception, all those isolated chapters. But today, we are pulling all the way back.
We are looking at the entire board.
Yeah, we are zooming out to map the macro structure.
Which is so crucial. We need to understand the universal architecture of how we perceive reality, which is essentially the entire cycle of creation, bondage, and awakening.
And that opening premise I mentioned, that you are a verb rather than a noun, it really is the perfect entry point, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, it captures the central realization of this entire philosophical framework. Because fundamentally, we simply do not have access to reality as it is.
Right. We only have access to an observer-dependent consensual reality.
Exactly. The observer and the observed they're not two separate entities just staring at each other across an empty room.
Like they're completely isolated.
Right. They are co-evolving every infinitesimal fraction of a millisecond. I mean, one is constantly conditioned by the other and simultaneously conditioning the other.
But, you know, we don't feel that way at all. I walk down the street and I feel like a completely independent, solid entity moving through a world of other solid, independent entities.
You feel like a noun among nouns.
Yes, exactly. So today we really want to unpack how our minds compulsively construct these artificial models to basically freeze that centerless flow of reality.
And how we become so violently enslaved to these models, yeah.
Right. We are going to trace the biological glitch that starts the cycle, look at the architecture of our suffering, and finally, and this is the best part, walk through that 11-step Madhyamaka logical reasoning to see how we can actually achieve liberation.
Without losing our ability to function in the conventional world.
Yeah,
That's key.
That's so key, because we still have to live our lives. So let's start under the hood. The engine of creation. Because this isn't just a philosophical error, right?
No, not at all.
The meat computer inside our skulls actually evolved to do this?
It is entirely rooted in biology. I mean, our visual cortex and subsequently our higher conceptual reasoning operates on this biological software imperative known as edge detection.
Right, edge detection. I really want to dig into that. How does that actually work in a pure survival context?
Well, imagine our earliest ancestors, right?
Yeah.
Navigating the savanna. It is a highly volatile, highly dangerous environment. If you are foraging for food and there is a predator nearby, a tiger, let's say, you simply cannot afford to view the world as a seamless, interdependent tapestry of co-arising phenomena.
No. If you sit there pondering the profound interconnectedness of the tiger, the wind, and the tall grass.
The tiger eats you.
Yeah.
You become lunch.
Precisely. You need your visual processing system to instantly, and I mean instantly, draw a hard, absolute binary boundary right where the grass ends and the tiger begins.
Your biology basically demands absolute certainty.
It craves it. It wants a reality that is as undeniable as a jagged white line on an X-ray film. Broken or not broken. Safe or dangerous, self or other.
So edge detection is literally the brain arbitrarily slicing the visual field into actionable pieces.
Yes, it's an isolation tactic. The brain forces a boundary upon a tiny slice of the universe so that the organism can interact with it physically.
And this biological edge detection is so deeply hardwired that it fundamentally shapes how we conceptualize literally everything.
Absolutely everything. You know, there is a physical phenomenon mentioned in the sources that illustrates this cognitive editing beautifully. It's something our eyes do constantly, but we are completely unaware of it.
You're referring to saccadic masking.
Yes, saccadic masking. So if you pay attention to how a camera moves in a movie, it pans smoothly across a room on a track, right?
Smooth, continuous motion.
Right. But human eyes do not do that. When you look around a room, your eyes dart in rapid, erratic, jerky movements called saccades.
It is chaotic.
Completely. If your conscious brain processed all of that jerky motion, you would be perpetually dizzy. You would just be nauseous all the time.
The visual input would be an unreadable blur.
Exactly. So the brain pulls off this incredible trick. It physically shuts down your visual processing for a split second during the eye movement to edit out the blur.
It goes blind, essentially.
Yeah, it takes these separate, isolated, static snapshots of the room, and then it physically stitches them together in post-production. It literally hallucinates a perfectly smooth, continuous movie of reality for you to experience.
And that biological editing room, that is the exact template for our conceptual mind.
Okay, unpack that. How so?
Well, the underlying reality of the universe is a seamless, centerless, interdependent flow. It is continuous flux. But our conceptual mind applies saccadic masking to the universe itself.
Wow.
We take that fluid reality, we edit out the ambiguity and the interdependence, and we stitch together static conceptual snapshots.
We basically turn the river into a series of frozen photographs.
Which leads directly to what the texts identify as the core psychological delusion, the disease of reification.
The disease of reification, I mean, it sounds like a dusty academic term, but it is incredibly aggressive when you break down what it actually means for our daily lives.
It is. Reification is the psychological delusion of taking something that is inherently fluid, abstract, relational, or highly complex, and mentally freezing it into a solid, independent, absolute block of ice.
We want to stand on the ice.
Exactly. It is the desperate desire to stand firmly on a solid object rather than acknowledging that we are actually swimming in a continuous current.
We want a foundation. We desperately want the world to be made of nouns. And the sources describe the way we enforce this illusion by talking about an invisible mannequin.
The invisible mannequin. It perfectly illustrates how our language enforces reification.
I found this concept so fascinating. Let's talk about the coffee mug.
Right. When we observe an event, let us say a cup of hot coffee sitting on a table, what are we actually observing?
Just functionally.
Yeah. We are observing a temporary relational nexus of heat, liquid, ceramic, gravity, and the ambient temperature of the room. It is a highly dynamic event.
But I don't look at it as an event. I look at it as a mug, a solid noun.
Because the mind cannot handle the ambiguity of a temporary relational nexus. So it implicitly invents an invisible mannequin, a foundational phantom core entity.
A base.
Right. We hallucinate this core, and then we dress it up in the clothing of temporary properties. We say, the mug hath heat, or the mug has extension in space, or the mug is red.
We literally separate the object from its properties.
We mistakenly believe that the invisible mannequin possesses inherent existence, which in Sanskrit, as you know, is called sabhava.
Sabhava, right. Inherent essence.
We assume that if you stripped away the heat, the redness, the liquid, and the ceramic, there would still be some fundamental metaphysical mugness just sitting there in the center.
It's like we project this grammar of subjects, verbs, and objects onto the universe and assume it represents absolute, objective truth.
That is exactly what we do.
But wait, I'm stuck here. I want to push back on this a little.
Please do.
If this biological edge detection kept our ancestors alive, keeping them away from tigers, and if creating these conceptual categories allowed us to build bridges, invent antibiotics, split the atom, how is it a disease?
That's the logical next question.
I mean, it sounds like an incredibly successful, highly functional survival feature. And what about modern science? Doesn't advanced physics actually give us access to the base reality of the universe?
That is a vital distinction we have to make. The disease we were talking about is not the act of seeing the tiger. It is not the act of building the bridge or categorizing the atom.
Okay, so conventional reality is fine.
Conventional reality is highly functional. Madhyamaka philosophy does not deny the functionality of the conventional world. The tool itself isn't the problem.
Then what is?
The tool is necessary. The delusion begins when we take that conventional, temporary survival tool and start believing that the edges we draw represent absolute inherent reality.
Oh, I see.
The delusion is not the fear of the tiger. The delusion is believing that the self that fears the tiger is a permanent, indestructible, metaphysical noun hiding inside your skull.
We mistake a highly functional provisional map for the ultimate territory.
Precisely. And regarding science, science is a magnificent, highly rigorous tool, but it fundamentally operates using the exact same cognitive machinery as our ordinary perception.
It's just edge detection on a quantum level.
It is. Science provides phenomenally accurate predictive maps of how phenomena interact. But it still assumes there are discrete, inherent phenomena interacting.
It uses higher, more refined, dualistic models built on top of implicit models.
Yes, models on top of models.
Yeah.
But it never accesses reality as it is, free from conceptual imputation. You cannot fundamentally grasp a centerless flow by simply inventing a more precise, microscopic ruler.
The map, no matter how detailed or mathematically elegant, is still just a map.
Exactly.
So we are essentially using a hammer to try and sculpt water. We take a biological tool designed for spatial survival, and we use it to construct our entire ontological philosophy of existence.
Which brings us to the architecture of bondage. Because once the mind arbitrarily draws these rigid edges, what specific shape do these conceptual models take?
They take the shape of triads, and this is where we really get into the weeds of how we trap ourselves.
The triadic structure is pervasive.
It really is. When I was reviewing the various chapters of the MMK for this, it was staggering to see. We literally cannot process an event without instantly chopping it into 3 distinct pieces.
The dualistic mind naturally and aggressively carves the centerless karmic fractal into 3 distinct spheres across every single domain of human experience.
Let's walk through how this manifests, starting with Chapter 1, Causality. How do we hallucinate a triad there?
In causality, we observe an event, like a seed, growing into a sprout. But we do not see a continuous flow. We conceptually isolate a cause, which is the seed.
Right.
We isolate an effect, which is the sprout. And then we invent a third independent phenomenon, the invisible action of production that somehow connects the two.
We assume they are 3 separate, inherent things interacting, and we do the exact same thing in Chapter 2 with motion.
We do. If you walk across a room, you do not experience it as a singular, interdependent unfolding. Your mind hallucinates a goer, the independent person walking. Right. Then it isolates the physical action of going. And finally, it projects a separate destination waiting to be arrived at.
So I naturally assume that I am one independent entity, the walking is an action I possess, and the kitchen is a totally separate location existing independently of me.
And it becomes even more intimate, more problematic when we look at Chapter 3, which deconstructs perception.
Oh, man. This is the one that really messes with your sense of self.
Because it targets the invisible mannequin directly. In perception, we project a perceiver, the permanent, unchanging version of you sitting in a little theater behind your eyes.
Watching the screen.
Yes. Then we isolate the act of perceiving as a tool you wield. And finally, we project the perceived object out there in the distance.
Triads everywhere. Even time itself gets violently sliced up. In Chapter 11, we see how the mind carves the flow of time into a past that is supposedly locked away in a vault, a present moment that we are supposedly standing inside of, and a future that is rolling toward us.
We treat the entire universe like a giant bucket of isolated cosmic Lego bricks.
The Lego brick fallacy, yes. I love this analogy because it perfectly captures the mechanical failure of our worldview.
It really does. We operate under the absolute delusion that the actor is a solid red Lego brick, the action is a solid blue Lego brick, and the result is a solid yellow brick.
And each brick has its own fixed essence.
Right. We assume they possess inherent existence, svabhava. We believe they are floating around in the universe independently, completely self-contained, and they just temporarily snap together to form an event.
We think the red brick retains its exact redness and its exact shape, whether it is attached to the blue brick or not. We think we are nouns performing isolated verbs upon other independent nouns.
But the truth is, none of those bricks exist in a vacuum. You cannot have a driver without the act of driving.
Right. If I'm sitting in a parked car with the engine off, I am not a driver. I am just a person sitting in a metal box.
Exactly. The identity of the driver and the identity of the act of driving do not exist prior to their interaction. They instantaneously co-create each other, the exact microscopic millisecond the event occurs.
So the redness of the brick does not exist until it connects to the blue brick. The connection itself creates the property.
Yes, but because we fail to see that instantaneous co-creation, because we are blinded by saccadic masking and edge detection, we endlessly pile these artificial triads on top of one another.
In a completely fractal way. Models built upon models.
And because these models are built on false, reified premises, the perceived world becomes exponentially complex, convoluted, and completely paradoxical.
This is samsara. It's not, it's not some hellish alternate dimension you get sent to when you die. Samsara is simply this limitless, centerless, fractal cycle experienced through the delusion of reification.
It is the cycle of bondage. We create these imperfect, rigid models. We desperately attach ourselves to them because we crave the binary safety of the X-ray film.
And then we become slaves to our own artificial creations.
Exactly. Because these models are completely out of accord with reality as it is. Because the flowing river of reality absolutely refuses to stay frozen. Our attachment to the ice generates immense psychological friction.
We are constantly defending absolute borders that do not exist.
We suffer because reality constantly violates our rigid models.
And this naturally brings us to the concept of karma, which is basically the engine that keeps us trapped in this fractal. But we really need to shatter the Western misconception of karma here.
We do.
Because when most people hear karmic cycle, they picture like a cosmic behavioral scoreboard.
They view it as a moral ledger kept by an external judge.
Right. Like you cut someone off in traffic, the universe tallies a negative point in a giant book and punishes you by giving you a flat tire next week.
Which is a profound misunderstanding. Karma is not a moral judgment. Karma is a continuous, real-time neuroplastic update.
Real-time updating.
It is the raw mechanics of mutual co-arising. It is a biological and cognitive feedback loop. Think of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail.
How does that feedback loop actually operate in real time, like mechanically?
A conditioned perceiver performs an action based on their current conceptual model. That action generates a perceived result in the environment. And then instantaneously, that environmental result feeds backward to update the neurochemistry, the synaptic pathways, and the psychological conditioning of the perceiver.
The boundary between the inside and the outside totally dissolves.
Completely. The environment physically and cognitively shapes the mind, and the conditioned mind simultaneously projects its edges onto the environment. It is a centerless loop occurring in fractions of a microsecond.
Okay, let's use the ship of Theseus analogy to really ground this, but apply it to a mundane trip to the grocery store. This perfectly illustrates how the goer from Chapter 2 is never a static noun.
Walk us through the drive to the store.
All right, so you grab your keys and you get in your car to drive 20 minutes to the grocery store. Conventionally, you believe you are the exact same inherent person arriving at the store that left the driveway. You are the solid red Lego brick.
You feel like a permanent noun.
Exactly. But over that 20-minute drive, literally millions of your biological cells naturally die off and are replaced.
Your physical substrate is radically altering.
Right. Then someone cuts you off in traffic. Your edge-detecting brain perceives a threat, your amygdala fires, and your bloodstream is instantly flooded with cortisol. Your entire blood chemistry fundamentally shifts.
The environment has updated the internal state.
Then you turn on the radio and listen to a news report. As you process that new information, your neural pathways physically adapt and rewire to store the memory.
Synaptic changes.
Yeah. So by the time you park your car at the grocery store, your biology, your chemistry, and your neuroplastic structure are entirely different from when you started the engine. You have been continuously dismantled and reassembled by the journey itself.
The goer at the origin is completely obliterated. It never survives unchanged to become the goer at the destination. The heavy static noun you call I simply does not exist.
You are a fluid, dynamic process continuously updating in real time based on environmental feedback.
But almost no one is aware of this creation, conditioning, and bondage cycle.
No. People are just endlessly suffering as they try to balance on these melting blocks of conceptual ice, wondering why they keep falling into the water.
They're totally unaware of a way out.
So if we are trapped in this fractal of triads and false nouns, how do we actually wake up? What is the mechanism of liberation?
A precise step of awakening happens when we finally become aware of the true nature of any given duality, triad, or conceptual model. And we achieve this not through blind faith or mystical training.
Right, it's not magic.
No, it's through ruthless surgical logic. We apply the 11-step Madhyamaka diagnostic, which culminates in the ultimate stress test, the tetralemma.
The 11 steps of Madhyamaka logic, let's not just skip to the end. I really want to walk through the architecture of how this deconstruction works. How do we take a triad like the seed, the production, and the sprout and actually dismantle it?
Okay, the process begins with observation. Step 1 is recognizing the assumption of the invisible mannequin. We must catch ourselves in the act of projecting an inherent essence onto a phenomenon.
So I look at the seed and realize I am treating it as a permanent, closed-off entity. I am assuming it has some core seedness.
Exactly. Step 2 is isolating the triad. We clearly define the boundaries our mind has drawn, the cause, which is the seed, the effect, which is the sprout, and the assumed action connecting them.
Got it.
Step 3 is the search for the boundary. We try to find the exact microscopic coordinate where the seed ends and the sprout begins.
Which is impossible because it's a continuous biological flow.
Precisely. When we fail to find the boundary, we move to the core of the diagnostic. Steps 4 through 7, which is the application of the tetralemma.
The four-cornered logic gate.
Yes. We subject the relationship between the components of the triad to this gate to see if they can actually possess inherent existence.
We ask 4 specific questions. Are the spheres inherently identical? Are they inherently different? Are they both? Or are they neither?
Let us test the first corner, which is step 4. Identity? If we claim the cause and the effect, or the actor and the action, are inherently, absolutely identical in their essence.
Then causality completely collapses into a meaningless tautology.
It does.
If the seed and the sprout are perfectly, inherently identical in every absolute way, then the seed already is the sprout. No action of production is required or even possible.
Absolute identity erases the dynamic relationship entirely. It erases the verb.
It's like saying if the conventional world of physical form is absolutely identical to the ultimate truth of emptiness, then dropping a glass on a tile floor wouldn't shatter it, because emptiness doesn't break.
That's a great way to look at it. So seeing the absolute failure of identity, the conceptual mind naturally retreats to the second quarter of the tetralemma, which is step 5, difference.
If they aren't identical, they must be inherently different, totally separate.
And this is where most of us comfortably live. We assume the red Lego brick is completely separate from the blue Lego brick. We assume the subject is totally separate from the object.
But if two things are absolutely inherently separate, it means they possess closed-loop essences.
Yes. An independent essence, by definition, does not rely on, interact with, or acknowledge anything outside of itself. It is hermetically sealed.
It has a massive, impenetrable metaphysical vault built around it.
Exactly. So if the cause and the effect are entirely separate, an unbridgeable metaphysical void exists between them. They can never touch. Causality becomes physically impossible.
Because if the seed's essence is absolutely closed off from the sprout, the seed can never transition or transfer energy.
If they are inherently different, there is no shared ontological space for the interaction to happen.
Furthermore, if causality requires no intrinsic link, if things are just radically different, then a rock could cause a tree to grow, total chaos would reign, or total paralysis.
Yeah, right. So identity fails because nothing happens, and difference fails because nothing can happen.
What about corner 3, step 6? They're both identical and different.
That is a mere logical pileup. It is cognitive dissonance masquerading as profundity.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
You cannot combine two logically broken bridges and expect them to form a stable one. A thing cannot be simultaneously hermetically sealed and perfectly identical to something else.
And corner 4, step 7, they are neither identical nor different.
This is a retreat into complete nihilism.
Yeah.
It denies our lived functional experience entirely. It suggests reality operates in some mysterious, unapproachable, mystical realm that defies logic, which, well, it's usually just a lazy way to smuggle inherent existence back through the back door.
Okay, so the tetralemma destroys all 4 extreme possibilities for inherent existence. We have proven logically that the seed and the sprout cannot be identical, different, both, or neither. Which leads us to step 8. We are grasping at empty air.
We are grasping at empty air, and that is the moment of breakthrough. Because every extreme position leads to logical absurdity, we are forced to conclude that the spheres of the triad are entirely empty of inherent existence.
They completely lack a fixed, standalone, independent core.
Yes. This realization is step 8, the second truth emptiness, or sunyata.
But wait, I want to clarify this, because emptiness sounds like a dark void. It sounds like a cosmic eraser, just wiping the universe clean and leaving nothing behind.
It is the exact opposite of a dark void. Step 9 is realizing that because they are empty of a frozen core, they are necessarily inseparable, co-defined, and dependently co-arisen.
Dependent origination.
This is the first truth. The seed can become the sprout only because neither the seed nor the sprout possesses a frozen, permanent essence.
Emptiness is not a vacuum. Emptiness is the necessary breathing room of the universe that allows for change, motion, and interaction.
If things were full of inherent essence, the universe would be paralyzed in a state of frozen stasis.
Which brings us to step 10, the union of the two truths. The conventional appearance is the emptiness, and the emptiness allows the appearance.
There are not two different layers of reality. One truth flawlessly enables the other.
There are some brilliant metaphors in the sources that shatter the illusion of independence and illustrate this instantaneous co-creation, like the metaphor of the parent and the child.
That one is profound. You simply cannot isolate the essence of a parent in a dark vacuum.
No, because the very identity of the parent is instantaneously co-created the exact millisecond the child is born.
They lean against each other like two sheaves of reeds. If you pull one away, the entire conceptual structure collapses.
Yeah.
You cannot be a parent without a child, and you cannot be a child without a parent.
The identities are mutually dependent and completely empty of standalone existence.
The other metaphor I love is the echo in a canyon, because it perfectly explains how something can be empty of a core essence, but still be highly functional in the real world.
Yeah, let's walk through the mechanics of the echo.
Conventionally, you stand on the edge of a canyon and yell. The sound wave bounces off the rock face, travels back, and physically vibrates your eardrums.
It might even startle a bird into taking flight. It has
Oh,
a
yeah.
real measurable physical impact on the environment.
But if you walk down to the bottom of the canyon and try to grab the absolute independent core of that echo with your bare hands, you just catch empty air.
It is there, yet not there.
It is an interdependent event, a temporary collision of air, vocal cords, and rock geometry. It is not an independent thing that you can put in a box.
It is functionally effective, but ultimately empty of an absolute essence.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt here because the echo sounds beautiful and poetic, but everyday reality is sharp and unforgiving.
It can be.
If everything is an imputed mirage, a holographic echo, a dependently arisen event lacking a core, why does it still hurt so much?
The problem of pain.
Yeah. If I'm walking down the street, deep in philosophical contemplation about the emptiness of all phenomena, and I accidentally walk face first into a brick wall, my nose still breaks.
Yes, it does.
The blood is real, the pain is real. If the wall is an illusion, why does my face just pass right through it?
That is the ultimate test of Madhyamaka, and it is vital to answer it correctly to avoid falling into nihilism. Madhyamaka absolutely validates your pain. Conventional reality functions perfectly.
Okay, so the wall is real.
The laws of classical physics, the temporary aggregation of atoms interacting with the biology of your face, that is all undeniable on a relative level. The broken nose is real. The illusion is not the pain, and the illusion is not the physical collision of atoms.
Then what exactly is the illusion?
The illusion is the absolute independent wallness that your edge-detecting mind instantly superimposes onto that temporary aggregation of clay, heat, and mortar.
The invisible mannequin.
Yes, the illusion is the invisible mannequin you invent to hang the properties of the wall upon. You suffer existentially because you believe your rigid conceptual map is the objective territory.
Wow.
The physical interaction of aggregates is real. Your reification of it into absolute, eternal categories is the mirage.
So we suffer psychologically because we reify the wall into an absolute noun instead of recognizing it as a temporary collection of conditions. So, if applying this 11-step diagnostic logic shatters the wallness, is awakening just a one-time magic trick? Do I just run the tetralemma once, realize my nose broke on an aggregation of conditions, and boom, I'm enlightened forever?
Far from it. Because samsara is a limitless fractal of models built upon models, awakening is an ongoing asymptotical process.
It's gradual.
You don't just clear the board with one realization. You have to gradually deconstruct subtler and subtler assumptions, aggregates, and dualities, all the way down to the deepest layers of your consciousness.
It is an endless unpeeling of the onion.
And here is where the philosophy turns its analytical scalpel on itself. This is crucial. The emptiness of emptiness.
Oh, this is the trap. Because the human mind hates ambiguity so much, the moment we realize the conventional world is empty, we desperately try to turn the philosophy of Madhyamaka into a new absolute religion.
Exactly. We try to freeze the cure into a new disease.
We run the 11 steps and think, aha, I have found the truth. Everything is empty. Therefore, emptiness is the ultimate objective reality.
Right. We think emptiness is the base reality server room, holding up the universe.
We try to turn emptiness into a new, solid floorboard to stand on.
But Nāgārjuna explicitly warns that the concepts of dependent origination and emptiness are themselves dependently co-arisen and empty. They are mere designations.
Just pointers.
They are conceptual tools we invented specifically to cure the disease of reification. They do not possess inherent existence either.
There is no base reality server room.
There is nothing to grasp. To ensure we do not build a new cage out of the very tools of our liberation, we must transcend all dualities using the generalized tetralemma.
Right. We must affirm that reality is not this, not non-this, not both, and not neither, for whatever this happens to be.
For whatever this happens to be.
That covers every noun, every verb, every philosophy, and every realization. You even have to apply it to the ultimate duality in Buddhism itself. Samsara, the cycle of suffering, versus nirvana, ultimate liberation.
Because we naturally think of them as two totally separate physical or ontological locations. We reify them.
We think samsara is a burning building, and nirvana is a cool, peaceful forest a mile away that we have to run to.
But Nāgārjuna radically demonstrates that there is zero physical or ontological difference between them. They are both entirely empty of inherent existence.
They share the same ontological space.
Nirvana is simply samsara, perceived with wisdom, free from the grasping and reification that defines the bondage cycle. The ultimate nature of nirvana is the exact same ultimate nature of samsara.
Okay, if I cannot categorize reality into this or that, if I cannot even separate samsara from nirvana, doesn't language itself completely break down?
Oh, it does.
I mean, our grammar fundamentally requires subjects and objects. How can I even speak about the universe without nouns and verbs? How do I order a cup of coffee if I cannot differentiate between the buyer, the seller, and the coffee?
Your intuition is entirely correct. Language absolutely fails at this level, because language is a conventional tool built strictly for dualities.
Designed by biological creatures to point at tigers and run away.
Exactly. It was never designed to encapsulate the non-dual, limitless, centerless fractal of reality.
So language is just another map.
Yes. The map is not the territory. The word water cannot quench your physical thirst. We must use language as a temporary pointer. The traditional metaphor is a heavy wooden raft used to cross a raging river of confusion.
But once you reach the shore of understanding,
You do not heave that heavy conceptual raft onto your back and carry it with you into the forest. You drop the raft. You drop the language of absolute extremes.
but if we drop the raft, if we must drop all concepts and realize the lack of any absolute ground or separate entities, how do we actually live in the world?
Because Monday morning still happens.
Right. I still have to pay my mortgage. I still have to feed my kids. How do I navigate society without falling into total apathy, the nihilism where I just sit on the couch because nothing matters?
This is the absolute culmination of the 11 steps. This is step 11. The conventional re-engagement. This is the middle way in practice. It is historically known as acting without acting.
Acting without acting. It sounds like a Zen paradox, but it's actually the exact antidote to apathy.
It is. It means we engage fully, skillfully, and fiercely with the conventional simulation of life. You still pay your mortgage, you still order your coffee, you still go to work, and you still intensely love your family.
You use the dualistic models, the maps, the triads, and the categories because they are conventionally necessary for functioning in a shared biological reality.
But you use them differently now.
You use them without ever being a slave to them. You use them without attachment, without reification, fully knowing their true, empty, interdependent nature.
There is a highly modern metaphor from the sources that perfectly captures this state of mind. It compares acting without acting to playing a deeply immersive video game, like Elden Ring.
Ah, yes, a phenomenal parallel for the modern mind. Break down the psychology of the player.
When you're sitting on your couch fighting a massive, terrifying digital dragon in that game, your biology reacts.
Oh yeah, your heart rate spikes, your palms sweat.
You engage fiercely with the conventional rules of the game's matrix. You dodge, you attack, you care intensely about the outcome of the battle.
You are fully participating in the simulation.
Exactly. Yet when your character inevitably dies and the screen goes black, you do not suffer ultimate existential trauma.
You don't call an ambulance.
Right. Why? Because underneath the adrenaline, you ultimately know that the dragon is a co-created illusion made entirely of computer code, pixels, and the processor in your console.
You participate in the matrix, you feel the thrill of the interaction, but you do not experience absolute suffering because you never reified the dragon into an absolute eternal reality.
You play the game, but you know it's a game. You use the models, but you know they are code. You don't suffer when the rules change or when the avatar falls.
And when you finally master this posture in real life, when the heavy conceptual raft is left on the shore and you stop trying to freeze the flowing river, you reach a profound shift in perception.
You perceive the limitless, centerless cycle as primordially equal, pure, perfect, and one.
We have to be very careful with the word one here, though. We aren't talking about monism. We aren't saying that I and the coffee cup are literally the exact same undifferentiated cosmic soup, right?
Correct. If everything were a featureless, homogeneous soup, the conventional universe would break. A dog couldn't bite you because teeth couldn't pierce skin without conventional boundaries and different properties.
So what does the oneness actually refer to?
When we say one, it is strictly in the non-dual sense. Not many, not one, not both, not neither. It means that every single unique, vivid thing in the universe shares the exact same empty, interdependent nature.
The oneness is the shared emptiness. It is the primordial equality of all phenomena lacking an inherent core.
And realizing this shared emptiness leads to the most breathtaking behavioral extrapolation of the entire philosophy.
Yes. When you truly realize that you are a verb, that you are empty of a static self, compassion ceases to be a moral chore.
It does. Compassion ceases to be a commandment handed down by an external authority figure telling you to be nice to earn karmic points. Becomes raw ontological physics.
Raw ontological physics. How does compassion become physics?
Well, if the boundary between self and other is ultimately a conceptual hallucination of the visual cortex, which we have established, and if the observer and the observed are an infinite feedback loop constantly updating each other in real time,
Then there is no inherently separate self to protect, and no inherently separate other to attack.
Exactly. So malice is just a mathematical error. Hurting someone else out of malice, greed, or selfishness is a logical absurdity. It is literally causally injecting poison into the very environmental web that will instantaneously loop back to update your own neurochemistry and perception.
The analogy of the left hand and the right hand is perfect for this.
Consider your own physical body. If your left hand accidentally touches a hot stove, your right hand does not pause to debate the ethics of helping.
No, it doesn't weigh the pros and cons. It doesn't ask if the left hand deserves to be saved or blame the left hand for being clumsy.
The right hand inherently feels the interconnectedness of a single biological organism, and it pulls the left hand out of the fire instantly. It is spontaneous, uncalculated, immediate compassion.
Because the suffering of the world is quite literally your own suffering. There is no metaphysical vault separating you from the pain of the environment.
When you deeply perceive the centerless, interdependent fractal of reality, when you realize the primordial equality of all phenomena, compassion is simply a spontaneous, logical reaction to the way things actually are.
When the illusion of duality collapses, you realize that protecting the whole is the only logical action. That is just an incredible world-altering paradigm shift.
It fundamentally rewires how you interact with every single moment of your existence.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today, zooming out from the micro deconstructions to map the entire universal architecture.
We certainly have.
To summarize, as biological creatures, we use edge detection to survive, but our cognition glitches via saccadic masking. We create imperfect, rigid models using triads, chopping the seamless flow into causes, productions, and effects.
We suffered the disease of reification, hallucinating an invisible mannequin.
Right. We get fiercely attached to these models and become slaves to them in the real-time, updating, limitless fractal of samsara.
But then, we free ourselves. We apply the 11-step Madhyamaka logic, culminating in the tetralemma, to test these boundaries.
We realize the true nature of these models, their dependent origination and their ultimate emptiness. We discover the union of the two truths.
And finally, we drop the raft. We step back into the conventional world. We use these models playfully.
We engage fiercely with the simulation of life, acting without acting, and generating spontaneous compassion because we know the absolute boundary between self and other is a mirage.
We realize the X-ray film was never meant to show a solid, indestructible bone. It was only ever meant to show the beautiful temporary light passing through it.
That is the ultimate liberation. Well, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Something to test this new paradigm in your own experience.
A practical application.
Tomorrow morning, I want you to observe the actual machinery of your own mind. Just sit quietly and watch it work, in the exact fraction of a microsecond before your mind imputes a label onto an experience. Right before your edge detection categorizes a sound as noise, or a feeling as anxiety, or a person as other, what actually exists in that silent, completely unlabeled gap?
Who are you in the space before the concept is born?